And yeah, what time is it there right now, Michael?
10:30 in the morning.
Wow. And we are 10 o'clock in the evening. Yes, story of different worlds.
Yeah.
What is it like now over there? Has it been raining or foggy?
No, it's the beginning of our summer,
Mm-hmm.
and here in the western side of Colorado, it's high desert, so
Oh
it's
yeah,
very, very dry.
got it. Rocky Mountains over there. Michael is
Yeah.
here on time, all the way from Colorado. He was kind to accept when I told him that this is the special week where we are celebrating the journey of Dick. And he was so kind to accept that invitation, and he's here. So, Michael, how did you get onto the timeline of NLP?
Well, that's an interesting story. I had read about NLP in 1985, became aware of it, but it wasn't until 1986 I went to a concert of two brothers who did a presentation of singing, and at the break I was talking to one brother, and he was about my age. This was 86, and he said he used to be a therapist.
Oh,
And I said, used to be, because he was 30 some years old. And he said, yeah, after I could cure a phobia in 10 minutes, I got bored. And being a therapist at the time and doing phobia cures at the time, it would take me 3 to 6 months. So I said to him, what's the joke? And he wouldn't tell me. Later in the night, I said, okay, I'll play the game with you. How would you cure a phobia in 10 minutes? And he wouldn't tell me. He said, there's a book called Frogs to Princes.
yeah.
And so a week later, that conversation was running around. And so I went and bought the book. A week after that, I had a client, and he said, I'd been working with him for 2 months, still had a phobia. And he said, is there any faster way? Because I was doing a hierarchy of fears and doing relaxation processes. And I said, well, there's this silly book, and I don't think it works. I can't imagine how it would work. And he said, well, just read it to me. So I literally read the script to him. And at the end, he said, I said, okay, see now if you can get the phobia back. And he couldn't. And I know that my jaw dropped much more than his. Because if this process worked in spite of me, and with me not believing it, and with having no training in it, I figured I got to learn this stuff. Yeah. So I chased down Richard Bandler, and that began my journey.
How was it being with Richard Bandler?
Weird,
was
really
it the
weird.
Tough guy? The tough guy?
1987 was just right after he had been cleared of the murder charge.
Oh, that was horrible.
So he was still pretty wild, but the people who knew him told me that he was really calmed down.
He has until today also, right? Did he even till today?
Yeah, he looked like a gangster. He was overweight,
He
very
is.
rude and very foul in his language. And but there were times when he was really spot on, and there were times when he was loving and caring, and he was skilled with what he knew. And so I spent my time 4 years with him, learning and working with him.
Was that musician Todd Epstein?
I never met Todd. Todd was in those days with Robert in Santa Cruz, and I was with Richard in San Diego.
Todd also was a musician. What's your inspiration to be on the timeline of NLP? What's your motivation?
Well, it's always been to help people. It's always been to find new and better ways to facilitate healing, renewal, inspiration.
Yeah. We in India know NLP because we've all learned from Dick. And Dick would write on his board every time when he teaches NLP, he would write those four names: Milton Erickson, Gregory Bateson, Virginia Satir, Fritz Perl. And then he would say, it's the two lonely guys, Richard Bandler. And then he would say Leslie, and then Judith, and all those names he would come, and then he would say, this is Micheal Hall. Yeah. And I've heard this name for the first time in 2008. He was on your doctoral committee. Tell us more about what was it like to be with Dick?
Well, as you know, very humble man, very, very sharp and intelligent, very caring. And that's how he carried himself privately when I was with him. Very generous. When we first made contact, he sent me a 1,000-page document on his writings of NLP.
Yeah.
1,000 pages.
Yeah.
And so it took me a long time to read through there, as he had been collecting and gathering and putting it together in one format.
Yeah. NLP did come a long way, and you've been most known for the meta states model.
Right.
Tell us something about it. Like I think all of us would like to learn, what is the meta states model? It's something that you really originally came out with and you developed that. It's a deep thing.
So one of the things I did when I first entered NLP, I wanted to understand the four giants. So I read everything that Bateson wrote. I read everything from Korzybski. That took me 2 or 3 years from Korzybski's work. Read everything Virginia wrote, and Fritz Perls later on. I read everything that Milton Erickson did. So out of Bateson and Korzybski, the idea of meta, and Korzybski even started playing around with the idea, what if you had a state about a state? And so my first modeling project was resilience. And this was 1990 to 94. I spent 4 years working on how do people, when they get knocked down, bounce back? How do they just get up and get on with life? Resilience. So in studying resilience, I came up with a strategy, and it was pretty much the 5 steps of grief of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. You get knocked down, you go through some angry stage, an emotional upset, an emotional roller coaster. Eventually you start coping. You put your life back together. You get a community who helps you to stand back up. Eventually you start mastering things by getting a new vision and reestablishing your values. And so, like a strategy, a step by step by step process of how you do resilience. At the time, I was asking people, who has been really knocked down? Who's had an emotional hell and you come back? And in 1994, when I was in Denver at a conference, I asked a gentleman about that. And at some point, I said, how did you know to go from this stage to that stage? And he said, well, it was like a state, a meta state about all of those states, a state in which I knew I would get through it. Well, when he said meta states, just all the studies from Korzybski and Bateson flared off. And so that began the creation of the metastates model. The metastates model models self-reflexivity. Self-reflexivity is the kind of brain you and I have. Because I don't just think about something. As soon as I think about it, I think about my thinking. I don't just feel something. As soon as I feel something about that feeling. Actually, the first feeling is almost irrelevant. If I'm angry, well, okay, so something has violated my values. But the biggest question is, what do you think of your anger? Because if you hate your anger,
Yeah.
you got hateful anger, and that's going to make it worse.
Yeah.
If you're angry at your anger, if you're calm about your anger, calm anger is really very different from fearful anger. What if you were respectful of other people, respectful anger? So meta states is the state about your state. And when you have a state, if you step back, go meta, access a tempering state, you can temper the first state with the second.
Yeah.
So one of the things we say in meta states is the quality of your state is the quality of your meta state.
Is it like the dissociation and the double dissociation?
No, not at all. That's where NLP missed it and created a myth that when you step back, you're dissociating. But imagine the state of learning. Now step back into joy. When you step back into joy and have joyful learning, you don't have dissociation. You have more emotion.
More emotion.
Not less. Now it's joyful learning. What if it was passionate, joyful learning? But what if it was responsible, passionate, joyful learning? Yeah. So now we metastate learning with, 2, 3 more states. And now we're going to get a rich gestalt state. And so meta does not mean dissociation. And that's where Robert Dilts went wrong on this. Richard Bandler went wrong on this. John Grinder went wrong on this because they think it's stepping back and being less emotional.
Yeah.
That's one choice. You can step back and observe. That's the observing your anger. But what if you step back to compassionate anger?
Yeah. Yeah. So is it the fourth description where we say that there's a description of myself and then there is a field? Is it getting into the field to be in the no emotion state or a different emotion state to see this so that now things get distorted and therefore I can see it differently because without violating the original feeling?
Right. So when you metastate, you transcend and include.
Yeah.
So here's the first state. I'm going to transcend it and include it.
That's a brilliant line, Michael. And I would like to take note of that line. It says, when you feel violated, you get the anger, and that's the very moment you transcend and include.
Right.
That's a brilliant 2 lines, that's a brilliant 2 lines.
Right. So we don't want the emotion to go away. If you're angry, you're angry. And if it's legitimate, it's a God-given legitimate emotion. So let's just put it in the larger one of respect and love and compassion. And now the anger has a new quality.
Yeah. You don't get rid of one, but you keep that to see how you can transform and then transcend and still have the original quality of that.
Exactly.
Michael, would you take us through a small activity around this?
Well, one activity that we all do is learning. And how many learning problems, learning dysfunctions, learning disorders do people have? Do sometimes NLP people have? And how many learning disabilities do people have that are wanting to learn? So first of all, we start with learning. And of course, when you think about learning, you got some reference point. It could be in 5th grade when somebody yelled at you.
Yeah.
So you got some reference point. So first question would be, what do you think of learning? And regardless of the state, it's boring, I'm no good at it, I won't get it, others are faster, so whatever. The question now becomes, if you step back, what do you think about that would be a more enhancing state, enhancing belief, enhancing thought? And so we know certain things help with learning. One thing is having fun.
Yeah.
So that's why I always encourage people, first of all, step back to joy. And maybe, and most people would have an experience, when did you learn something and it was fun? When did you learn something and it didn't even seem like learning? It seemed like you learned to roller skate and it was fun. You learned to ski, it was fun. You learned to ride a bike, and you learned something, but it didn't even seem like learning
Yeah.
because it was so joyful. So that could be the beginning of step into that joy of the learning, and now step back to you're a good learner. You learn that quickly, you learn that thoroughly, you've got it.
Yeah. A good structure for modeling. A very good structure for modeling. Um, how is this connected? How would you connect this to the Bateson's learning levels?
What Bateson did with the learning levels was to look at the epistemology of
Yeah.
learning. So that's what he was interested in. So you can learn, then you can learn about your learning,
Learning. Yeah.
which is what we call accelerated learning or meta learning.
Yeah.
And you could go the third level up and now learn about how you learn. In one way, that's what we do with meta programs.
Yeah.
Am I using
That's
global or specific or matching mismatching?
yeah. That's a good hypnotic language pattern when he says, you got to be thinking about what you're thinking. One thing is you can learn and then learn about your learning. When you learn about your learning, you have some inputs, some key things, which you can now take and model it wherever you want to model. I think, Micheal,
Yeah.
you're giving away gold. It's it's years of experience. How many years you've been on this journey of
Well,
exploration?
so I started studying NLP in '86. So that puts it.
But before that, also you were in the clinical background.
My background at the time was in therapy and
Yeah.
doing therapeutic work.
What's the most funniest thing that you came across in therapy?
Well, years and years ago, when I was growing up in the 1950s and 60s, we had a TV show called Art Linkletter, and he interviewed children 3, 4, 5 years old. And the title of the TV program, Children Say the Funniest Things.
Uh-huh.
Well, in some ways, clients say the funniest things.
Oh yeah.
To them, it's serious. They're dead serious. Uh, if 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 this happens, it'll be the end of the world.
Yeah.
And so they say the silliest. So that's where the meta model, in some ways, is a way of helping someone take a lighter look at the way they talk,
Yeah.
because they say a lot of silly things, and sometimes just feeding it back. I just heard you say, and letting them hear themselves.
They would
Sometimes for the
sometimes
first
defend,
time.
right? They'll sometimes
Yeah,
defend that.
yeah,
The very first model made of NLP is the meta model. And from there, there's been so many useful models. And the beauty is these models
yeah.
can be used in such less time. How would you define what NLP is, Micheal? And then what is not NLP? It's funny nowadays, people do anything and say, this is NLP.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of NLP which is not NLP. How do you say, how do we know what NLP is?
Well, it's a communication model. So the very first book, the title, Structure of Magic, a book on communication and change.
Yeah. And
It's
everything is
communication.
communication.
Yeah. It's how we communicate to ourselves, how we communicate to others, how we match meanings, and how we mismatch.
I think
It's
that's the most,
communication.
yeah, that's the most crispiest definition I've ever heard. It's a model to communicate. And all of life is a communication. The goals that we have is a communication to the things around. Our relationship is communication. Our health is communication.
Yeah. Yeah.
Brilliant.
And because it's a communication model, we communicate from a state to a state. Because if I'm in the wrong state, I can say the right things,
Yeah, it
but
goes
the
away.
tones.
Yeah, the other person will jump into it.
Yeah. And if the other person's not in the right state, and I'm trying to communicate and they're not in the right state, and I haven't helped them to get in the right state, it's going to be miscommunication.
Yeah, and you cannot not communicate.
Exactly.
That's a good one, right?
Yeah.
Was the map is not the territory the very first presupposition that they picked up, or was there something even before that?
Say the question again about Krzyzewski.
The map is not the territory.
Right.
Was that the very first precept that they picked up?
Yeah.
That's the very first one they picked up. Yeah.
So that's how the first book, The Structure of Magic, it starts with that.
Yeah.
That whatever I say is not the thing I'm talking about. This is just a symbol and representation of something. And if I think this is real, if I think my words are real.
Yeah, the map is not the territory. The menu is not the food.
Yeah, exactly.
The word is not the thing. We can never. Will NLP ever be unified? Will the world, will our living world ever have an understanding, a knowledge, more than the epistemology, like you said? Will we have a practical understanding of this is what a practitioner is, this is what a master practitioner is? Or will it always be scattered? And we know that as days become months and years, after the magicians went to war, I think, I don't know what to say.
We've been working on it. In 2012, we started the NLP Leadership Summit, and every year we call NLP leaders together to London to meet, and usually it's only 40 or 50. And then
it's always
every 2 years,
it's always 2 people less.
Yeah. The two of the founders never come. Frank Vaselli.
Really? Is it 2 or 3? Since you mentioned 2, it's 3, right? Yeah. We always knew it was 3.
So Frank Vaselli, the third person, he and I started the NLP Leadership Summit, and every 2 years we gather for a 3-day summit, and so we're trying to do that. We're in the process, probably a 10-year process to create a global body. There's so many egos that are in the way.
So many. So many.
And trying to come to a consensus of what constitutes a practitioner or master practitioner. So we've got several things in the works and going slow, maybe waiting for a few people to die.
Did Richard and Frank work initially, or was it Richard and John who worked initially?
It was first of all Richard and Frank. Yeah, Frank set up the original Gestalt groups, and Richard came in and helped lead through those. And as Frank and Richard were discovering that some of these language were really powerful and there was changes going on, they asked John to come in to try to model out, how is this working? And so you may not know that Frank was married to Judith Delosier.
Judith Delosier, yeah.
Then they got divorced and Judith married John.
John Grinder, yeah.
And during that same time, Frank became he and Leslie Cameron became lovers, and they lived together. And
that's where the gun was held. Was that the time when the gun was held?
No, that was a little bit later. So when Leslie went off with Richard to meet Milton Erickson, when she came back, she broke up with Frank and then married Richard. So those are some of the closet stories of our history.
Yeah. So to everybody sitting over here in this room, you must understand that you are actually listening to some untold stories, which I too never dared to speak in any of the classrooms ever. We've always stood by the popular understanding of the founders as Bandler and Grinder, but today you know that there's Frank, and Frank was the man who stood with Richard, and then came John, and then the magicians went to war. And did you also have to pay a lot of money?
No, I came in much later. so I was 10 years later, 86 coming in. And I did my training with Richard, wrote several books for Richard. Um, and
Was it with
then,
your name? Did you get your name on the books?
no, he never put my name on the books. And a
The
couple
real
of the books have
gangster.
never been published. I'll
Yeah,
publish them
yeah,
sometime in the future. Um, but it was 1996, another 10 years later, where in 1995, Richard decided to sue the field of NLP in the United States.
yeah.
And that was a $90 million lawsuit that destroyed NLP in the United States, which is why there's just almost no NLP here in the United States anymore. Richard lost that lawsuit in 2002. And so that's in 1996 is when we started neurosemantics, because if he had won it, then we could not have taught NLP as NLP.
NLP.
So that's why we started neurosemantics.
Yeah. And there's so much happening. And I think the behaviors of a lot of these people sitting on top is so competing, so much judgmental. How do you take care of your inner world, especially when you are right there where the fun is happening? How do you take
And
care of
when you
your
say,
inner world?
take care of my inner world,
Your resilience, your own resilience. So like when things are falling apart in the world, where you are also participating in many ways, how do you keep your resilience? How do you keep your calm? How do you know that state? What's the practice of the practice that you do?
well, first of all, I think I operate from um, a strong self-referent with external check. So the
Yeah,
self-referent is knowing my values, knowing my vision, knowing what I'm doing. And if I'm trying to do good, helping people, then I'm just going to stay with doing that. And I guess the other is an acceptance of reality. People fuss and fight, they blame, they name call, and it happens in every field.
it does.
And and so when I was with Richard Bandler and I would see him be foul mouthed or curse someone or be ugly or tell really ugly stories, it was just like I cleaned my ear. Um, that's his stuff. It's not mine.
Yeah,
And my job is not to straighten him out. If he would ask me for help, I would do it, but I don't need to go around fixing everybody.
yeah. Dick would say that, don't fix what's not broken. And even if it is broken, it's not your monkey and not your circus, he would say.
Yeah.
That's a classic from Dick. How relevant is NLP even today? What's one of the most finest models that's so handy and so popular? Of course, the phobia cure, or um,
Yeah.
more on that. What's the most?
Well, because NLP is a communication model, I mean, what is more relevant than communication? Husband and wife, parents and children, organizations, politics. So
Yeah,
NLP is more relevant today than ever because people still do not know how to be professional in their communications, how to be calm, how to be reasonable, how to make things clear. Um, and so for me, it's the communication model that is still the most relevant thing. Now, there's lots of little patterns like the phobia cure and other things um, that can be fast, quick change,
yeah.
but
New
that's
behavior.
just kind of the glitter. It's really
Yeah,
not the heart of it. The heart of it is communication, and when we can communicate well to ourselves, we're going to be healthier. We're going to be more wholesome. We're going to be more loving, and that's going to affect relationships. And once we know how economies work, then we can do really wholesome and healthy wealth creation instead of trying to manipulate someone else to get their money.
yeah. It's a very good model to build more successful models.
Yeah.
Would you like to elaborate something more on the meta states, which was your classic creation? Would you like to share something more on that?
What we found in metastates was that the metastate structure explains all of the powerful patterns of NLP. So if you take like the phobia cure, how does that work? Why is it that you imagine a movie theater, you put up a scene, you play it through to the end, you step into it, you rewind it from inside? Why does that work? Because it sounds pretty silly. And yet what you're doing is setting frames.
Yeah.
Frame after frame after frame, you're setting frames so the person has a new way to interpret an old experience. And so every time you start with one state and you transcend and include, the second state sets the frames. And those frames will be belief frames, value frames, assumption frames, decision frames, identity frames, permission frames, memory frames, imagination frames. And so we say in neurosemantics, whoever sets the frame controls the game.
Controls the game, yeah.
And someone is always setting a frame.
I think that's the key essence of flexibility and agility also. Somebody who can take the essence of changing the instant feeling with a new look onto the frame.
Yeah. Exactly.
Dick would tell us that everything is distortion, whether it is generalization or deletion, it's still distortion. Yeah. And the new behavior or the instant change or the phobia cure, it's all distorting using the tools of reframing.
Right.
Yeah.
So in setting a frame, and this is really the most basic NLP skill, setting a frame. Because once you have the frame, you got a way of interpreting things.
Yeah.
And the interpretation you make is the meaning you create.
Yeah.
And so this is where the semantics come in, the meanings, that if you're living with meanings that are low level or toxic, your life is going to have low quality and toxic, sick responses. Yeah. So as we look at the frames we're setting, are those good, healthy frames? And do we need to either deframe it or reframe it to where we can now create some more higher level meanings that's going to make life meaningful?
Yeah. I think if everybody can take just this one aspect and work the whole life through, you wouldn't need another tool. The moment you feel grief, just change that frame, understand what's the quality of what you're experiencing and see what happens when you just change that frame. When you're seeing a financial loss, what happens if you change that frame from financial loss to an opportunity frame or a new creation frame? You know, it's all about changing frames. All life is that. And like Micheal said, the day you decide to change your frame is a new life from there onwards. And the past event will stop haunting you from there. Because now you can control your inner game.
Right.
Yeah. Tell us something more that we've never known of you. or the subject that you, or your practices, or something interesting that you find about yourself. Give it to us.
So I was a therapist for many years and used NLP originally for doing therapeutic work. I live in a small town, so we have 50, 60,000 people.
It's a very popular place. He's just being humble by saying it's a small town. It's the Rocky Mountains of Colorado.
So I was seeing anybody for about anything I could do just to have enough clients. The problem was, once I learned NLP, people were getting what they wanted really quickly. So I was ruining my business. So I started doing communication training workshops. Because I figured, because most of the time when husbands and wives would come in and a lot of, it was communication problems. So I
It
started
is.
running communication training. Then after I got the trainer certification, I started running NLP Prac and Master Prac and running that. And I discovered that I loved the training more than the therapy. So
Yeah.
slowly I changed out of that. And then with Metastates, that kind of put me on the international uh, um, place. So, because I was being invited to many countries to teach that. But what I found that was most interesting to me, and probably my gift, was modeling.
Yeah.
So after I did the resilience modeling, um, then I decided I was going to fix up myself. And the next thing I needed was a wealth creation strategy.
Yeah.
So I modeled wealth creation and did that. And then selling strategy. And so then over the last 25 years, I have had 27 modeling projects. And out of each of those came books and came training manuals and programs.
We can practically model anything, anybody, provided you get to know what state that is. Health can be modeled, success can be modeled. When you're not
Yeah.
modeling something, you are still modeling something.
Yeah.
People who go pattern after pattern into failures are modeling failures. Yeah.
So here's the connection between metastates and modeling. In NLP, almost all the modeling is around instantaneous things.
Yeah.
How to make a decision, how to get up out of bed, how to be motivated to go to work, like instantaneous. But how do you model wealth creation? How do you model health when it's not the case that you access state of health, step into the state of health, and suddenly you're healthy? You don't
Yeah.
access a state of wealth, step into the state of wealth, and now you're a millionaire. It doesn't work that way. It's for most of those things, like leadership, how long does it take a person to become a leader? Probably 10 years. I mean, to really know what they're doing and to have that integrated and to be able to be an effective, caring servant leader.
Yeah.
So with metastates, we can model complex states like health, like wealth, like leadership, etc.
Yeah. That's a very good takeaway, to know that you become an overnight success after 20 years of hard work.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's what Winfrey says, that luck is when opportunity meets your preparedness. And what is your preparedness? To constantly know what your values are, what your mission is, what's your call of action, and to stay committed to that path. Um, to stay committed to that. And one of the finest thing that he said, I don't know whether you picked that up, was to be a servant leader. Now that is so rich, to be a servant leader. That is such a valuable integration, if you can understand that. A leader is not a leader is not a hierarchy. He's one amongst them, and he's here to serve.
So when I started the modeling leadership, I had to make a distinction. Am I modeling a dictator, someone who commands and controls? Because anyone can command and control if you got power or if you got enough fear, but that's not a leader. If we're going to model someone who wins the minds and hearts of people, wins the minds and hearts, that person can't do it by control.
Yeah.
So now the question becomes, how do they do it? Well, by serving.
Tell me a book that's changed your life.
Well, probably Alfred Korzybski's original book, Science and Sanity. You have to be kind of insane to read it. It's 840 some pages.
It's not easy read.
Oh.
It's not an easy
I've read
read.
it 9 times now. And every time I read it, I'm just digging out more insights and awarenesses that I missed the first 8 times.
I must have picked the book 9 times to read, and I didn't read even once.
So that book probably has made the most difference, especially for my modeling, than any other
Yeah.
book.
Yeah. I'm heavily inspired by Noam Chomsky and his method. When you said Crosby, yeah, his contribution to the language.
Yeah.
What is a quote that you can fall back on? A quote that's so inspirational to you?
So in NLP, when Robert Dilts started the health certification, he and Susie Smith came up with a line, energy goes where attention goes.
Yeah.
I adjusted that in neurosemantics. Energy goes where attention goes as directed by intention.
Yes.
Who makes the biggest difference in the world? People who are intentional,
Yeah.
who are on purpose. They have an agenda, they have a motivation, and now their attentions do service for their intentions.
Yeah. That's we come out with a new formula, and the formula is simple. Intention plus attention, that's your focus, plus energy is equal to creation.
Yeah.
And that energy can be converted into action. You know the law of physics, right? So intention will motivate your focus to stay long so that you won't get bored. Now dispense your energy, and energy can be converted into potential or kinetic, and
Right.
that can be converted into instantaneous creation of whatever that is. And that on the left hand side is your modeling, and modeling is supported by your frames, and you view your frames to the different meta model states, what Micheal says.
Yeah.
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 What's your favorite movie?
It'd have to be The Matrix.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of NLP in it, right?
Oh, a lot of NLP in it. A lot of Alfred Korzybski.
Yeah. Oh
Uh,
yeah. Oh yeah.
the Wachowski brothers who wrote it, at the opening of that movie, has a book that they take off the bookshelf called Simulation. And it was one of the books that Korzybski quoted in Science and Sanity.
Oh yeah, that's
So
an
that
insane movie.
In the original screenplay of The Matrix, there's a scene that was not put in the movie. It was filmed, but wasn't put in the movie. And it's when Morpheus is in the big red chair inside of the Matrix, and he turns to Neo and he says, "You've been living in the map. I'm going to show you the territory."
Oh, that line is
And
not there in the movie.
no, it's in the screenplay that the
Yeah.
movie was made from.
That's deep. I'm just lost from my question sets.
Well,
That is deep.
we live, all of us live in a matrix.
We do.
It's a matrix of frames that we have received from parents, school, religion. We live in that frame, and we think it's the world.
Yeah.
But it's a map of
It
the
is.
world. And most of us, like Neo, it's when we become adults that we start waking up and realizing that this world is like a splinter driving us mad because it needs adjustments.
It does.
And NLP is the adjustment.
And yeah, and take the submodalities which you want to adjust the way you want, put the frames around it to see how it goes, and know, and doesn't matter what you're adjusting, know that back there's a planet where you're not born yet, and right there at a planet you're already dead. Tell me, how is your typical day normally?
Now that we're in house arrest.
Yeah. Has it opened
So
up
the last 3 or 4 months I've been here locked down, and so it's not been typical at all. Normally I'm away from home about 80% of the time, traveling and training. One of the intentions I've set is every single day I read at least 30 minutes. I write at least 30 minutes, and I exercise 30 minutes. So that's the foundation of wherever I'm at. I'm going to keep those habits alive and fresh.
Take notes. Michael writes, reads, and exercises. 30, 30, 30. That's more than 1 hour of power. That's 90 minutes of power. That's self-investment. It's investment in the nervous system. Michael, Neeta asks us, how do you relate anger with disease?
Well, so here's something else about metastates. You start with a state, and if you bring a positive state to it, the positive state will include and transcend and include. The positive state will qualify the lower. But what if you bring a negative state against your state? What if I'm afraid of my anger? What if I'm ashamed of my fear? What if I'm contemptful and disrespectful of my sadness? Anytime I bring a negative state against a state, I'm in self-attack.
Yeah.
I'm in, and that message, that communication, the body is going to try to actualize it. The mind will try to actualize. So we humans, unlike any animal, we humans have 90 autoimmune system diseases.
Yeah.
And autoimmune system disease means somehow we're attacking ourselves. And so you bring anger against your anger, or anger against your fear, or sadness, or whatever, anger against your joy.
Yeah.
If you bring a negative emotion against yourself, you are in self attack. And it's not going to work out well.
Sometimes I know the theory at a cognitive level. Yeah, I know how to do it. Sometimes I go back and I say, I knew how to do it. But at that point in time, when life was pulling me, when shit was going down and I was going down the spiral, how do I get up? How do I wear my own cape and look up?
Yeah. I'd recommend make a meta decision. Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I will, from this day forward, not bring negative thoughts and feelings against myself. Negative thoughts and feelings are against something out there in the world, but not against me. I refuse from this day forward to do that. And once you make that decision, and then just hold yourself accountable to that decision until it takes. Until, of course, I'm not going to attack this God-given mystery and wonder of life. Then we can use our negative thoughts and feelings effectively. They're about something out there, and then we can protect ourselves.
Yeah. 2 more questions, Michael. One is, how would you take NLP and put it into leadership coaching, corporate coaching nowadays? How is coaching and NLP connected? We all know that it's more towards the mental health or towards therapy. How do you draw this bridge?
So we have a little over 4,000 meta coaches now around the world in 68 countries. And we put together meta coaching as a methodology, not for therapy, but for people who want to be challenged, who want to step out of the comfort zone and be the best version of them. So our distinction is, if you want peace and quiet, you probably need therapy, because there's probably some war, something unpleasant inside that needs to be dealt with, and you need healing from whatever that trauma is. But if you're ready to be challenged, if you want to be more, think more, feel more, have more, give more, if you want to step out and get uncomfortable, you need challenge, you need coaching.
Yeah.
So that's the line between therapy and coaching we use.
Yeah, I never thought about it that way, and that's brilliant. They say if there's something wrong and you feel there's something wrong, and you feel that you're not able to function normally, you need therapy. But if you're functioning normally and you want to enhance that function, you need coaching.
Yeah.
Because therapy will will heal something from the past, and coaching will take you to the future.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
very good definition. There's one more question. Could you take us through, Aditya is asking that, could you please take us through a process of one of your modeling project in detail so that we can use that process as a template?
If you're going to model something, you have to, first of all, clearly define what it is. So with wealth, let me just take wealth for an example. What is wealth? Well, wealth is the idea that whatever investment you make, you get more out of that investment than you put in. So am I wealthy, that is productive, with my reading, with my writing, with my exercise? Do I have wealth in terms of time? Because you're not very, if you don't have any time for yourself or your loved ones, how wealthy are you? Are you wealthy in your relationships? Because if you're not getting along well with other people, no matter how much money you have, are you really wealthy? Are you wealthy in your mind? Do you have lots of ideas, creative ideas, insights? Wealthy in your emotions, emotional intelligence, wealthy in your speech. So wealth is abundance of resources. And finance is one. Inside out wealth. Wealth starts inside. I'm wealthy. I've got something to give. People will pay for that if it meets a need, satisfies a want. So once we identified what it is, then in modeling millionaires and billionaires, we found several paradoxes. It's not about the money. It's about the contribution. It's about finding a problem and solving it. You solve the problem, people will they'll pay to get that solution. So most entrepreneurs, they love problems. Give me a big problem. So you see Elon Musk, the problem, how do we get to Mars? When he solves that problem,
yeah,
he's going to make a lot of money because there's a lot of people who would like to make that trip. So it starts with defining it and then looking at the process. So how does the process occur? And wealth creation generally takes 10 years. So that eventually money is working for you instead of you working for money.
Yeah. That's a very good reframe of what wealth is, and clearing the notion that wealth is money, it's gold, it's richness, it's stocks. Wealth is when your output is greater than your input with probably regular effort. And like Micheal says, you become wealthy after 10 years, like you become overnight success after 10 years of staying committed on the path.
Yeah. So in terms of modeling, identifying what it is and what is not. Same thing with resilience. When I first started, I didn't think about the time frame. And eventually I was interviewing one person and he was telling me about all the things he had to do to bounce back. And after a while I went, how long did this take? And he said 7 years. Well, I don't want a strategy that takes 7 years before I bounce back. So I limited it to 1 month. Tell me you got knocked down, but a month later you were back. And eventually I found some people who got knocked down, but they weren't knocked down inside.
Yeah.
They were not traumatized. And so then we've got all these survivors from the Holocaust, survivors, Nelson Mandela, people who never got knocked down mentally and emotionally. So I said, that's what I want to model.
Yeah.
So that a person is defeatable, unstoppable, and their resilience is so strong you can't knock them down.
Yeah.
So the definition of whatever you're going to model is the first step, and it's most critical, and it's the hardest.
Yeah. What is that you're modeling? What is that you're not modeling? And how aligned is it with your ecology? To know whether that strategy fits in this template, so that you can give more, like Micheal says, be more, have more. And that's the genius, because like Tim says, the quality of your inner world will define the quality of your outer world.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Micheal, I'm more than grateful. I'm humbled. To the beginning of this, before admitting everybody inside, I told Micheal, I want you to be a little kind on me, because I'm nervous, and you could tell I was nervous. You know, Dick was all our teacher. I've learned with him, and it's fortunate to know that he spent time with you. And today here you are talking to us. That's so meaningful.
Well, it's my privilege. It's my honor to do that.